Welcome to the Vault Podcast, classic music reviews, presented by IV Creative. Now, here's your hosts, B. Cox and the crew.
Greetings and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Vault Podcast, classic music reviews, presented by IV Creative. It's a perspective of the classics from a fresh point of view. Appreciate you for taking your time and lending your ears to our perspectives. It could be any way of listening to anything, but you're right here with us, so we thank you. With you today, of course, is yours truly, B. Cox, and with me I have the crew, comprised of these fine gentlemen here with me today. To my left, we have my boy, Cousin Damo. To my right, we have my man, D.T. Dave, and right in front of me, we have my boy J.O. As always, we are here to give you our perspective on the classics. Pleased to have all you gentlemen join me as we chop it up over some classic music, and we always take you back in time to go into the classic music that shaped our lives. So without further ado, gentlemen, we're going to get to a very special one that I think is a very special place in all of our hearts. Is the debut album of the two dope boys in the Cadillac, Outkast-Southernplayaisticadillacmuzik, debut album of the cast, coming out in 1994. So here's the particulars on Outkast, released April 26, 1994, on LaFace Records, the now extinct LaFace Records, but the classic LaFace Records of so many different acts of the early and mid-90s. Truly one of our great urban music labels of our time.
The Motown of the South?
Yeah, absolutely.
Put in work. Definitely put in work.
Absolutely.
The Motown of the South.
No doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Run time of 64 minutes and 33 seconds. Recorded at, of course, the famous Dungeon, 1907 Lakewood Terrace, Southeast Atlanta, Georgia, as stated by the heads of the Dungeons, Organized Noise Productions. Also recorded at Bosstown Studios, now called Stankonia Studios, is now Outkast Studios, and Doppler Studios as well in Atlanta, as well as being mixed in a lot of different other studios. Executive producers by Kenneth Babyface Edmonds and, of course, Antonio L.A. Reid.
Baltimore's own.
All songs produced by the classic and legendary Organized Noise Productions, comprised of Rico Wade, Ray Murray, and Sleepy Brown. Of course, a lot of contributions by a lot of different musicians during this project, highlighting in particular Preston Crump on the bass, Mark Jefferson on guitar and bass, Jeff Sparks, Kenneth Wright, Craig Love, contributions by Mr. DJ, who was Outkast DJ for I think even to this day. Artist features you already know, the Dungeon Family, Goody Mob, Big Rube, Joy, you name it, they were on this album, because as looking at the documentary for the Organized Noise, the Art of Organized Noise, this was everybody's first album when it came to the Dungeon Family. This is where they put their all into. So
Everybody was on it.
Outkast-Southernplayaistic, as we say for short. Guys, I think this all holds a special place in our heart because of where we were at that particular time. This is April of 1994. I'll go around the room to sort of see where you were during that particular time. And I'll start with you, Dave, April 1994, when you first heard the album, where you were, and then your first reactions when you heard the album that long ago. This is 25 years ago.
My thing was I didn't even hear the album when it came out back then. Of course, my mom wasn't trying to hear that.
That rap music?
Exactly.
You trying to NWA around here?
My mom wasn't having that.
Yeah.
But I listened to it a little later on in life, and as we got prepared for this show, I had a good time just reminiscing about how I felt when I first heard it, and all the feels just came back, especially with the fact that I've now been to Atlanta a few times. It's just like it all just hits you. It's just like, man, this album's classic. So I look forward to talking about this album today.
Yeah. Jay, April 94, when it first came out, where were you? And your first reaction when you first heard it, and then your lasting reaction as you listened to it, getting ready to review it this week.
Okay, so April 94, so I think it was like, 12 going to 13. I was like junior high school, Jefferson, Southwest D.C. So like, but you got to remember around like 94 was like, at that point I didn't, and I guess like before, like I didn't really hear the album when it first came out. I listened to it later because that was like when
tapes.
Yeah, like that was like that's when the G-Funk era was running everything, Death Row.
Absolutely.
So like, and it's kind of funny, like, you know, again, like DC, like, you know, Go-Go being the scene, like when they actually did the song Ain't No Thing, which is one of my favorite songs off the album. So like my mother heard me like listen to that, and then the actual Outkast joint, and by the time I was already like deep in like Death Row culture, West Coast hip hop, like it was kind of a step back. She's like, okay, if you know what I'm saying, I could listen to Death Row and I'd be out there wild and acting a fool. Like Outkast ain't, you know what I'm saying, it's not that bad. So like when I did listen to it later on, it was just, it offered me a new flavor as far as like, you know, because pretty much it was like East Coast and West Coast. At that point, like I said, the West Coast is running things and the East Coast is finally starting to get their foot back in the game because they, let's be real, they kind of fell off at that point.
They did.
So to hear the South really coming out, like expressing like that level of lyricism that Outkast offered then and still offers now, it's just like, whoa, like, you know, the South really do got something to say. Like they said at the Source
Like
Awards.
they said at the Source Awards.
South got something to say.
You know what I'm saying? Like, because honestly, like, it really helped to solidify the South. Because I mean, you had other artists out of, if we could just keep it in Atlanta, like, and I don't even know if you guys know, but like Smurf and Kilo, like
Smurf, Kilo,
you know what I'm saying?
PA,
Like,
Parental Advisory, yeah.
right. So you had like those artists, and then me aside from that, Crisscross, like, you know what I'm saying. So you really didn't have like anything like really represent Atlanta, at least to like that street level that Outkast did, that everyday life level. So I mean, just looking back and just like really taking everything in, it was like, okay, wow, like they really are like the pioneers of everything. I mean, it was like as far as the South of the whole, okay, yeah, you had Ghetto Boys, you had the Miami bass shaking music, you know what I'm saying, like, and like even Atlanta like had that like bass music. I mean, obviously Miami like kind of ran because like Luka 2 Live Crew ain't nobody touching them as far as like
Exactly.
pop shaking, but like
the bass music, exactly, Miami bass.
yeah, so like, you know, when Outkast dropped and everything like that, it just really solidified like, look, the South has artists, they have lyricists, they will wrap circles around a good amount of people in New York or LA or wherever. So you know what I mean? So like, I mean, I would really put, even like then and now, I would put them up against, I've been here all night naming people that I know they can wrap circles around. So, but yeah, I mean, it just like really solidified, like I was really there for greatness. I mean, I just think of 1994 as a whole, like I'm just so grateful, like, you know, I was there to experience it and everything that was going on, like even at that young age. So that was just the last impression I have on me. Cause like when I think about the golden years, I just think like half my playlist is like stuff from '94 because it was just like that fire from like everywhere. So
absolutely, yeah.
That's like my whole impression of it.
Indeed, Damo, your first reaction when the '94 when you first listened to it, may not been when it first came out, and then your lasting reaction as you listened to it, leading up to the review of this album.
94, I was a baby. So, April 94, I can tell you that I heard this because I was home by myself because I was recovering from getting hit by a car. I didn't hear the CD. I didn't hear the album until that summer when I got around one of my older cousins, and he put me on to listen. I was down in North Carolina. He put me on to listening to Southern music, Crucial Conflict. Hey, in the middle of the bar, da, 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 da. So I was like, oh.
That's what I don't mess with.
So I was like, what in the world is this? I was like, all right. And then he put this on, and he just started vibing, and I didn't even know. Yeah, I was like, okay. This was probably more my introduction to rap. This album at 11.
Understood. You know, considering that time. Well, for me,
I also had one question from listening to this album. It made me think, if we would have never had them, would we have Thugger, Future? You know what I'm saying? Like, this is really the ATL door opening right here.
And that's the point that I want to make a little bit later on. Absolutely.
If you want to put Young Thug on Outkast, I mean, like,
yeah.
But I'm just talking about the Atlanta,
yeah.
The sound, yeah.
I'm not talking about him being like them.
Yeah,
well, he is weird like them. So
yeah, I understand. Hey. The sort of my first reaction when I heard it, and I heard it when around the time when it came out that summer, I was finishing elementary school, going into middle school, so I'm really starting to get into music. I'd heard a lot of different other classic albums in 1994, as we talk about. To me, when it comes to all-time years in hip-hop, it's got to be up there within the top 2 or 3 years of classic music ever coming out. But my first reaction, that it was different. It was unlike anything that I'd ever heard before. This was, to me, the first project truly from this part of the South that stood out as sort of like being legitimately Southern. Like you had Ghetto Boys sort of do their thing, and Ghetto Boys had a certain feel to it. You know, it was from Houston. You had the, as you said, Luke and 2 Live Crew, the Miami bass music. But this was when we talk about the Dirty South, like, hey, the term the Dirty South getting invented during around this time with them and Goody Mob. This with me is the first project truly from the South that stood out as a Southern project. And it was different from a lot of the different early offerings from Atlanta, like you talked about Criss Cross and Kilo and Parental Advisory. This was very unique, different from Ghetto Boys and from Scarface for early albums. It was just different in the fact that you had two guys and it was a group. They were both lyrically very talented, and then the production to me was really and the creativity was what made this stand out. It was funky, you know, and it was because the different elements that they used, and it was Organized Noise producing, and it was the musicians that they used in order to be able to make this thing work, you know, where, you know, it made you it sounded like they were using samples to produce these records, but they weren't. These were live instruments that were being played and were being, were being implemented into the production with the beats that were being made. You had basically Organized Noise and these musicians coming together to make this thing happen. Mm-hmm. My lasting reaction is what it's always been. To me, I think this is strictly a tribute to Atlanta and a tribute to how life in the South was at that time in the mid 1990s. To me, I just say this sparked the Southern movement in hip hop. People may have some arguments. Of course, yeah, Ghetto Boys were out there. They were a successful act. Luke and Two Live Crew were successful, and other Miami artists were successful. And there were artists that came out of Atlanta before Outkast and Organized Noise came along. But this was the first time that the rest of the country stood up and said, oh, okay.
They spitting.
Yeah, okay. You know, and even while there were detractors in New York, like even I read famously that Russell Simmons, when he first heard the album, thought it was trash and wrote it off as just being some country bumpkins, and you know, it wasn't the New York quality of hip hop, being New York's the birthplace. But after a while, he gave it its props, seeing where it stood after its legacy has cemented itself after some time. It started the leap for Atlanta on the scene, because after this. You have the rest of the Dungeon family starting to come out. You see a lot of different other acts from Atlanta started to emerge as a result of this. Mm-hmm. And acts like Ludacris and acts like T.I. and eventually to follow acts like Jeezy and people who, of course, is Rico Wade's cousin, Future. Becoming, you know, this, that, and
Dungeon family too, though.
And. It just led to pretty much breaking of the dam, like we saw falling of the Berlin Wall moment. That's what it sounds like. That's what it was for me. We talk about the themes of this album. To me, we talked about is life in Atlanta. And this is the first time now all of us, we've been to Atlanta at some point in time. So it makes a lot of sense to us. You know, I hadn't been until after this album, but a lot of it made sense to me, even now, as they call it, gentrified Atlanta. Because, you know, I have a particular homeboy, and I'll shout him out. Shout out to my boy Ralph Cooper, local comedian, and of course, producer extraordinaire. He was my producer at XM, the 169 The Power. He is a graduate of the House, Morehouse. And, he was in Atlanta during the time that these albums came out, that when Atlanta really started to make a name for itself. And that was really what he explained was the true Atlanta. And now this Atlanta that you see now was sort of like the way that people look at DC nowadays.
That's true.
That it's changed so much, and the soul of Atlanta has sort of left as it's become a transplant city, and things have sort of, you know,
and the nail in the coffin with that was they tried to make Freaknik family friendly.
Exactly.
Exactly. Freaknik back.
But
it's like family friendly.
It's still PG.
Yeah.
PG now. You know it ain't gonna be like the raw Freaknik we know, because we got these phones right here that I'm recording y'all on.
Exactly. So we sort of talk about like life in Atlanta, and you see that in the songs and the slang and stuff that they use on the albums that Big Boy and Andre used. You see it, you know, in the skits that they use, Club Donkey Ass, Flim Flam, like, hey, come on, man, I got these chains right for these white folks out Buckhead, man, for $80. You know, it's country living. It talks about, to me, poverty and class warfare, you know, the differences between, you know, the rich and poor, which they dealt with Atlanta more so than anything else. And, you know, for those of us who have been in the South, that's much more of a you know, highlighted of between the have and the have-nots in the South, much more than I think a lot of other parts of the country. Yeah, and it was talking about the beginning of the gentrification of Atlanta and the development of Atlanta. And you talk about this is 1994. So in 94, they had just had the Super Bowl in Atlanta, and the brand at that point was the brand new Georgia Dome. Right. And then 2 years later, they're getting ready to have the Olympics in Atlanta, which really spurred the development of the city overall as a major city. You know, Which whenever we know there's development in the city, as we call it, people call it gentrification. It is gentrification. Certain people sort of get pushed out to the fringes because development has no need for poor people. It doesn't, So a lot of that was talked about.
Quotable.
Buy that land cheap and just, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
and
property values,
yeah.
it's a wrap.
And the rap, exactly. And now, really the biggest theme is that, man, like you said, Andre said at the Source Awards when they won Best New Act, the South got something to say.
Sure enough, they did.
And that's important. I think it was, until then, nobody really, I think industry-wise, Atlanta was really an afterthought other than the fact of novelty acts. And, the ones who were the legendary Atlanta rappers have sort of not made it big enough to where they could be mainstream. Those are the themes there in the album. And just if anybody wanted to talk about the themes that were present in the album and what stood out to you more so than anything else.
I think the more I listened to it, the more they sounded. They sounded like they started the woke movement when you start listening to something like hold on, they talking about stuff that's relevant now, like
Right.
Get up and get out.
That's no good for you, and watch out for this. And I said, hold on, he wasn't messing with Erykah Badu in '94
that we know of.
And also, it was like I said, damn, we forget that CeeLo used to rap. That became a pop star.
And I have an interesting point to make about that later on, man, because we know the Dungeon family was very involved in making this album. And to me, the cultural impact of what this did, what this is. It launched the careers and directly and indirectly of so many other people in the music industry, as we just talked about it. Now, this might not be the best album in their catalog. It may not even be the best album in Southern hip hop history. But to me personally,
Dave is not agreeing with you.
But to me, I don't think there is a more important album in Southern hip hop history than this album.
I agree.
Across the board.
I agree.
Across the board. I don't think there's a more important album in Southern hip hop history other than this one. I think that without this one, a lot of things don't happen. And without this one, we don't find out, I don't think necessarily about Goody Mob. We find out, I think eventually because of the talent about Organized Noise, because of the fact that they were able to get a chance and for LA, as we saw in the documentary, for LA to sort of give them a chance and to see how widely it paid off, not just for them as a crew, but for the label and for the industry was big. So we'll get into the song reviews. This is what's really important. That's why you're listening. We're going to go by through the highlights. There's no shortage of highlights on this album. And then we'll start with Dave, your high points and highlights, your song high points, what stood out to you, and try to keep it to a few because I know there's a lot.
Oh, damn, man. For real, you only going to give me 3?
No, not 3. I said keep it to a few. Now it's not 3, a few.
Ain't No Thing, one of my favorites. Southern Playalistic. I would probably say Funky Ride. I'm going to talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
And
multi-purpose track right there.
Crumbling Herb. Crumbling Herb. That is one of my favorite tracks of all time.
Yeah.
Crumbling Herb. It's just fantastic. Mm-hmm. Of course, if you've listened to this album, of course you've crumbled more than a few herbs to this joint. But yeah,
if that's your thing, if that's your thing, absolutely.
If that's what you do, then I'm pretty sure you've crumbled a few herbs to this joint. But that's it's just so many.
Yeah,
so many great tracks. But those are my 3 or 4 favorites.
Jay, your favorites, your highlights?
Okay, so I guess we'll probably like unanimous here with Ain't No Thing because the joint just cranks.
It makes you feel good.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, even like hearing like Northeast Groove is like, adapt that into one of their shows, it just like made it crank that much harder for me.
Oh yeah.
So put that up there. And again, these aren't in any particular order. So Get Up, Get Out, Get Something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just like
I think every young person should hear that track.
Absolutely.
Every young person that ain't got no job, that really needs some motivation. I think
it ain't even about a job. It's about
just getting up,
realizing your potential.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. I think every young person needs to hear that track.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying, between that and watching the skit on YouTube, my roommate Pay All the Bills. I don't know if you've seen that one, but those 2 things will motivate you. But it's funny with Get Up, Get Out. Like back then, I just liked it because the beat was nice and it just flowed. But then you start getting older, paying attention to the lyrics, like. I mean, it was just like a solid track and motivation. I mean, it's like one of my motivation drains now, like just like making moves and everything. I know you're going to talk about this in a minute, but yeah, Funky Ride. Like I said, which is a multi-purpose track.
Multi-purpose track, absolutely.
I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Crumbling Herb, and if I'm not mistaken, it was Deep as the track Deep as
Deep
well.
is dope too.
Yeah, it's
I like how that started.
And then like I guess like Players Ball. I don't want to say it was a filler, but I mean because it was out before like the album because that joint dropped like '93. If I'm not mistaken.
It's a Christmas track.
Christmas
It's a
track,
Christmas
famously a Christmas
Right.
track.
I mean, yeah. So that one, and then like the little remix they did at the end of the Players Ball joint.
Players Ball
too,
reprise, yeah.
That was sick.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess those would be my highlights of the album.
Indeed. Damo?
Yeah. I love this show. I'ma say I love Ain't No Thing, of course, like everybody else. I love Players Ball. That's one of my Funky Ride. I probably listen to that. I probably hit the back button on that like 2 times, 3 times. I was like, hold on, I gotta hit that one more time. Love Funky Ride. I love the album. I love CeeLo spitting on there. I was like, that's what I was saying. I was like, dang, I forgot CeeLo. He gave it to me real quick. I think it's been so long I heard him spit that I forgot that he could. I was like, okay.
Shoot, 94 was a long time ago. So
A long time ago. Way back in time.
Yeah.
I knew then what I knew now, man.
But Get Up and Get Out, like you said, that's something that everybody needs to hear. I wish I would have listened to it more in depth back then, because my butt would have definitely been in every class back then. Or thinking of a master plan back then even more than now.
Yeah.
But hey, it's life.
No, I understand. To me, my highlights, as far as what my highlights are, Ain't No Thing. I go back to the documentary listening to Joy talk about her hearing Ain't No Thing. And she said that she was in an adjoining studio in Bosstown. What she heard was heard the track going, the instrumental just playing in the background.
Right.
The bass line. And then that ding ding, And she said when she sat there and listening to it, she was like, the loop just kept playing over and over again, and she just kept thinking to herself, "This is some of the baddest shit I ever heard before in my life. Like this, what is this shit? So to me, that was a great. By track 3, that grabs you, and that was a high point. The title track, Southern Playistic itself, I love the way that both Dre and Big Boy both spit on that. I loved it. That was a highlight to me. Players Ball, of course, that being their first single, the highest charting single. That was a Christmas track, and it was a Christmas track they didn't even want to do, and it turned out to be one of the biggest hits of their career.
That was on a LaFace.
That was on the LaFace Christmas album, exactly, and that was their one shot to get a shot on LaFace to be signed as an act, and that turned out to be one of the biggest hits. And that's probably the reason why this album got made in the first place, because LA wanted that shot, and that's the shot that they got, and they knocked it out of the park. Of course, Funky Ride, we across the board on that. As Jason said, it's a multi-purpose track, many purposes. Crumbling Herb, and then of course, last but not least, Get Up and Get Out. And like you said, that song makes so much sense to me now, more now than it did then. And I have to point to the highlights of this: of CeeLo and his verse, and the first two bars just gives it to you. I don't recall ever graduating at all. Sometimes I feel I'm just a disappointment to y'all. And those 2 lines right there
Resonates with so many people.
right. Because I think a lot of us our generation feels that way a lot with these struggles that we've gone through, and the things that we've had to deal with, how things have changed for our generation, how things are so different than our parents' generation, and even probably our older brothers and sisters as well. There's so many of us feel this way. Man, what's up with all these questions? You act as though you know something I don't. Do you have any suggestions? Because every job I get is cruel and demeaning, sick of taking trash out and toilet bowl cleaning. But I'm also sick and tired of struggling. I never ever thought I have to resort to drug smuggling.
It's like you said, like
you can remember them words.
right. It's
I
like
know the Lord ain't brought me this far so he could drop me off here, that I make myself clear.
It's like he was kind of like
Trying to
talking
be
to
the
himself in
man
that
I'm
verse
supposed
too. So that's
But he was
I'm
talking
trying to be the man I'm supposed to be.
Exactly. It was like it was sort of like he was talking to himself, but he was talking to us too.
Yeah.
He was talking to us too. Those are the highlights there. I mean, I love Deep as well. Call of the Wild is another one that I actually like as well, man. But there's a lot of different things on this track, in this album that I love because of the way that it was structured. And It is. So
Fuego.
so we'll talk about your favorite song then and now, if that has changed. So we'll start with you, Damo. Your favorite song then and now, has it changed? And if it has, what was it then and what is it now?
Of course, it's get out and get something, because we didn't have the tools to get some music like they do now. So we had to really verify on what the radio was giving us. So that song was on the radio. That's the one I heard. I was like, oh, okay. And it wasn't the lyrics. I'm 11, so I'm like, oh, okay, I can two-step to this. And they said,
Yeah,
all right.
that beat just took you over.
And I can understand, my mother telling me to get my butt up and go to school. Like, oh, yeah, I got to get out, get these grades. If I would have known what it really meant then, yeah. But back then, that was that song. And now it's, since I had a Cadillac, it's Funky Ride, Southernplayaistic. Yeah. Those two are my number one and 1A now.
Indeed. Yeah, so and Big Gip had a thing during his verse, and Crooked Ass Jackson got the whole country. Nigga, that my city is the big lick for 96, referencing the Olympics coming to their city, And there's big things around people in Atlanta when you talk to them about the Olympics and the people who are of age during that time about, damn, y'all bringing the Olympics here, but we got, it's niggas in Bankhead and at College Park and East Point, that's struggling, and we sitting here building all this shit for the Olympics, and so it's interesting that you mentioned that, man, during Get Up and Get Out. But Jay, your favorite song then and now, if it's changed, what was it then and what is it now?
Gotcha. And I will say, just before I say that, like, there's like a night and day difference between like Bankhead and Buckhead. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Young, like, my cousin took me around there. I went around like Bankhead, SWAT.
Yeah.
I don't want to say made a mistake, but like, I'm not going into the deck by myself.
So going to East Point Mall.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's real down there. Like 5 points, all that.
Yeah, and to speak a little bit about, and I don't mean to interrupt, but to speak about, this is the first album you start hearing about in depth. You hear about Atlanta. You hear about the hoods in Atlanta. You hear about SWAT. You hear about Decatur, East Point, College Park, all these things that are now household names. Listening to music. Yeah. This is the first time you heard this being represented in music. So it's interesting now. We talk about this. People talk about East Point and College Park and SWAT, Camerton Road and all these different other hoods in Atlanta. And
College
now
Park, or is it College Park?
It's College Park in Atlanta. Anybody from Atlanta will tell you it's College Park.
Yeah, College Park is down.
College Park is in Maryland, down Route 1. College Park. College Park is in Atlanta.
That is College Park.
Exactly. College Park is in Atlanta, home of University of Maryland. College Park is in Atlanta, or outside of Atlanta. But not Jay. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Not so good, but as far as like my favorites. Man, I don't think it's really changed much. I mean, yeah, Funky Ride is like, because we talking about like 94. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't participating in the purposes that song could have been meant for back in 94, 12 going on 13. So that's probably one that's like, that wasn't my favorite then, but is crept up to my favorites now. But then like, Ain't No Thing, Get Up, Get Out, Get Something. I mean, it became more of a favorite with Get Up, Get Out, Get Something because of them like paying attention more to the lyrics. I will say, I mean, I appreciated Southernplayaistic, the actual title track and what it was. I mean, I saw the video first, like, because I don't really think I saw, because I saw the video on Rap City. It was either that or Yo MTV Raps, one of those two. So to see them all, like, lounging and, like, okay, that's how they get down in Atlanta, you know what I mean? Like, like, just, like, the vibe it had and everything like that. Because, I mean, I had been down there before, but I was, like, young. And, like, the first time I'd been there, I was, like, pretty young. I was, like, 9 or 10 or something like that. So I didn't see, like, how people partied and all like that. I'm like, oh, that's how they get down. Like, because before I think, okay, everybody just, like, Southern country, like, didn't really think they rocked out like that. So when I saw that video, I was like, okay, you know what I'm saying? They got flavor down there and everything like that. So yes, that's what I took away from it. And like,
Dave, your favorite song then and now, has that changed? And if it has, what was it then and what is it now?
The title track was my favorite back then.
Okay.
It was just made you feel good.
Between those guitar licks, man.
Between that one and Ain't No Thing. Again, if you can't listen to Ain't No Thing and not smile. It just makes you feel that good. Now, as I'm a 37-year-old man, crumbling herb, And it's consensus. It's funky ride. It's funky ride. It's just
let me take you on a funky ride.
It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, and then I think what was that guitar solo towards the end?
bro,
That shit was fire.
So I think that guitar solo. I haven't found out exactly who that guitar solo was done.
I looked it up too. I couldn't find. I was like, yo.
So I know in the personnel for the actual album itself, guitar work was done by Craig Love. It was also done by Edward Stroud. Preston Crump and Mark Jefferson more so did bass work. You had a lot of bass guitar being worked by Preston Crump and Mark Jefferson, two legendary bass players. But that guitar solo at the end, kind of, set it off. Absolutely.
Jay made it the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think. What makes this album so great is the live instrumentation, which took it back to an era of music where you were actually composing music, and music had levels and built like in the 70s, because all these kids were kids for the 70s going into the 80s when they were adults into the 90s or young adults into the 90s. Dave, did you have any more like that as far as your favorite song then?
Yeah, it's just, but, the whole album's a masterpiece, but, those 4 songs stand out the most.
Indeed. So my favorite song then was Players Ball. That and also Southern Playistic, but my favorite song now is Get Up and Get Out. And it's because of the fact of how many different mediums it's been used in. Like I remember the movie ATL with T.I. That was in a particular time when he was trying to make it come up, and they were at a time in their lives where they had to make something of themselves. And that song speaks to so much, I think, of our generation and what it is that we go through. That the struggle that it is to sort of, be able to make something of yourselves, but the struggle it is to be able to do so even while you're trying your hardest at times. And it means a lot more to us as grown men now than it did back then. And I think that's why it's my favorite track now. So there we are. So moving on to now songs that you slept on then that you appreciate a lot more now. I think we all know, say, Get Up and Get Out. But besides that, any other tracks that you appreciate more now that you didn't then? So I'll start with you, Dave.
Funky Ride.
Okay.
Funky Ride, bro.
Funky Ride.
Yeah.
No, that's hands down Funky Ride.
So let's talk about, now since we're on the topic of Funky Ride, so we said it's a multi-purpose track, so I'd at least count at least 3 purposes you can have for Funky Ride. At least 3.
I'm at about 3 as well.
I'm at about 3.
Yeah,
you can chill to it. You can
drink to it.
You can drink or smoke to it, or both.
Or
you can smash to it.
You can engage in other adult physical activity.
Yeah, because let's all know, we all know the track at.
You can set the mood. Like, oh, hey.
Like we all know the track at the end when they're when you hear that the girl going through it, having her,
her moment,
having her moment. You know what I'm saying? That's what we all know and understand that, man. So we can feel that. So it's like it's a multi-purpose track. So we'll kind of go through. We went through some quotable lyrics, man. If you have any quotable lyrics, we'll put them out there. I mentioned CeeLo's. To me, it's CeeLo's whole first verse of that Get Up and Get Out is quotable because there's so many different things that he said. And then, of course, Dre's verse on that as well stood out to me. The fact that he was saying and kept missing the point that she tried to poke me with. The doper that I get, the more I'm feeling broke as shit. But that don't matter, though, because I'm a O-U-T Cash, so get up off your ass. There's a lot of different other quotable lyrics. I don't know if anybody else has any other different ones they want to point out, too.
I know it seemed like he was trying to push it that they ain't soft because it's like two jumps on there. I heard him say he talked about his heart, like, my heart don't pity pat for nobody who rap. I was like, oh yeah, he letting y'all know he's serious out here. Then he got another one where he say, my heart don't pump no Kool-Aid. You jump out, you get 2 sprays. I said,
that's on Southern Playalistic.
Yeah. Said, oh yeah, Dre. Tell him 3 stacks.
Yeah.
But I said, he let him know the ATL for real.
Yeah.
But that was but he was just so, his flow was just so
Top
beastly 5 on this joint.
Yeah.
And then when you got to ATLians, it kind of like started turning into the Dre that we know now, kind of like
it evolved. They both evolved.
I think that might be around the start. That's where everybody do too. So.
Yeah, I was about to say I think that's one.
And a lot of people sleep on Big Boy as an artist. They really do. They slept on him like as he got bigger, and I guess he, like he said, he evolved. He became more of a lyricist.
Yeah, I think they both evolved, and I think that they both evolved, and I think they changed. But through this was a good start for both of them, and I think even back then they complemented each other well. Big Boy and Andre did. You had two very distinct styles between the two of them. You know, you had two very distinct styles. I would have to say, as far as you know, a lot of quotable lyrics. If I could talk a little bit about very, very shortly about the musicians, of course, that they worked with there, and of course the people that contributed on the album. Goody Mob has been on there, and I remember Big Gip saying there's an Outkast album that's been out that he hasn't been on, and it sort of speaks to sort of like the way that sort of hasn't changed in time. That, you know, as people go on and as careers advance, that, you know, you have certain people that you always put on your albums, and eventually y'all sort of grow apart and you do your own thing. But it seems like, you know, those two groups sort of been joined at the hip, Goody Mob, Outkast, for the longest while, and I think that's the good thing about it. They sort of started at the bottom, and as they progressed, they kept working with each other as they kept going, you know.
And along the way, bringing other people in, like it's a Cool Breeze, Slim Cutter Calhoun,
yes,
like
exactly, Cool Breeze,
and then Killer Mike,
and then even like Sleepy Brown, kind of like breaking out, doing his own thing as a solo artist too, which I don't think a lot of people appreciate. So
Cam, Cam, the other Cam, not the Cameron, Killer Cam from New York, Cam of Atlanta,
Mr. Pink.
Yeah, so nah, definitely, and so to me, the another standout here is the production by Organized Noise. The three of them as a collective working together, and then also working with the musicians here to be able to create these beats that literally, like you said, sounded like samples, but they weren't. Yeah. These were all live. Most of these were live. These were live instruments that were being infused into the production by some great musicians, and that's what really kind of made this thing sort of work. We've been through this now. We talked about how great this album is, guys. How the legacy, to me, I think, like I said, it's the most important album in Southern hip hop history. Every one of us has seen the documentary to see how this changed everything. To me, the thing that sticks out to me about this album more than anything else is when Dee Dee, who was actually Peaches on this album, who was on the intro, that gave that, we got that Southernplayaisticadillacmuzik for your trunk. And that was actually Ray Murray's ex-wife as well. And she was also their manager. And she said that when they had the final playback after they had finally mixed the album down and mastered it and played it in the B Room in Bosstown Studios, and that when they played it back for the very first time, that nobody actually could say anything for about a minute after they finished the entire playback the way it was sequenced, because they had listened to something that was that great. She said when it was done, nobody could speak. Nobody could say a word, just complete silence. And the album dropped and it went platinum. And then after that, everything changed, like Rico said. Outkast became a big hit. Organized Noise became huge, and they became in demand by so many different other people after that.
Well deserved.
And it led to everybody else in the Dungeon family putting out projects, starting with Goody Mob,
yes,
who dropped a classic album the next year with their debut in Soul Food. And then the South was really on its way. So now we're at the end. I don't really have to say this, man. We all crossed the line. This is a certified classic, y'all. This time hasn't changed that. Bonafide, whatever. Like Damo said last said during one of our early episodes, certified. So this is where I want to sort of get where I want to get into the debate. Looking at Outkast's catalog historically, how does this stack up with the rest of their catalog? I mean, and to me, I'll think I'll use a pre-qualifier because I want to leave Idlewild and I want to leave the Speaker Box and Love Below out of it, because to me, as we had the conversation beforehand, Idlewild is based off of music from a movie that they made. Right. Speaker Box, Love Below, to me, is a Big Boy and a Dre album. It's not an Outkast album, if that makes any sense to anybody listening.
Yeah, like it's like a collective.
It's a collective. So if we're going to talk about from this album to Stankonia, how does it stack up to you as far as in order? And I'm going to blow your mind in a second after we're done, because I'm going to drop something else on you too.
That's going to be a tough one.
And I'll start with Dave.
Oh man, you had to come to me first.
He saw your faces you was making, so he had to come to
me first. It's hard because it's like you've got Southern Playlist, you got AT Aliens, you've got Aquemini, you've got Stankonia. I personally love Stankonia. That would actually be my number one. I would put Aquemini, then Southern Playalistic, and then AT Aliens.
I never heard anybody put it in that order before, but that's interesting.
That's because Stankonia, all 24 tracks, I bang with. That was also a track that, So Fresh, So Clean. I woke up to So Fresh, So Clean the day I graduated. You know what I'm saying? That album, that album to me is timeless.
Yeah.
Aquemini, classic. But yeah, it's just like, I think Stankonia is just a tad over Aquemini. But third place ain't too bad for Outkast, though, as far as I'm concerned. That's just, how I feel about it,
Jay, what say you?
Actually, I think my order may not be too much different for real, but like for me, I gotta put Aquemini first. I mean, because the production on it was just so flawless. And I'll be real, I remember back in like '98 when it first dropped, I was being a little bit of a hard ass on Aquemini, like not thinking because that was one of the. I think that was the only one that got like 5 mics in the source, if I'm not mistaken.
It was, yeah.
So I was like, man, I don't know if it was a 5 mic joint with like that wasn't my opinion out the gate, but now I actually listened to it through and through. I'm like, okay, yeah, y'all earned this spot. So, and just like all the bangers off of there, and even like, you remember that track on there, Mamacita?
Yeah, that was a banger.
Yeah, joint. I forgot what the chick's name was, but like just out of Jersey. I think her name is Mahogany, if I'm not mistaken.
Mahogany, that's it. So yeah, that's her name.
Yeah, so like her flow on that joint, and it just showed like how they were so versatile, even like East Coast artists, and they're just not like
that was a cruel track, bro.
Yeah, like even and shoot 3 Stacks verse in there, like you know what I'm saying, like grab her by a neck, throw her on the wall, say bitch don't never disrespect me, never not at all. Like and even like the little sample joint, like at the end, like before the hook came in, the hey nah ha ha, whatever that was, like that joint, it just sized it. So yeah, I would say Aquemini, then Stankonia, then Southern Playalistic, then AT Aliens. So like I said, my list isn't too much different. Pretty much just like we just flipped to the top 2. So
yeah, okay.
We might have to ask this on Facebook.
So Damo, what say you as far as where this album Southern Playalistic stands in their catalog?
I'm gonna go second. I'm gonna go
okay.
First because I love that jump. And that's fire. I love that one second because I just vibe. It's a vibe. The whole album to me is a vibe. Not even just Funky Ride. The whole Funky Ride gives us the extreme vibe, right. But the whole joint is a vibe before vibe was a word. But now being old, it's a vibe. And then I go Stankonia, and then I go AT Alien.
My answer is, if you ask me, my order depends on the day. I think for me, Aquemini is probably my number 1 for them. 2 through 4 though, it's gonna depend on what day I'm listening to it and what day comes around.
I forgot all about Return of the Gangster.
And on some days I could listen to AT Aliens and that could be my second favorite. I could listen to this and right now I could say this is my second favorite. But then I would think about Stankonia and where I was at that point in time, leaving high school, going into college, and listening to Stankonia. That could be my second favorite as well. So to me, I think if I had to give you an answer now, I would have to say probably third or fourth. I think you can flip flop AT Aliens that any one of, but not to say that AT Aliens is the worst, because the worst on their catalog is the best, and is the best out of some. And so here's where I said I would blow your minds later when we talked about this before the show. So we all talked about where this stands in their catalog. To me, I say this is the start. This Southern Playalistic is the start of a very good catalog that I think in hip hop is only rivaled by one other group in hip hop, and that's A Tribe Called Quest. I don't think there is any other 2 groups in hip hop that have catalog quality from top to bottom than these 2 groups, and that's Outkast and The Tribe Called Quest.
I can dig that.
But you could think about both groups, okay, from your first albums to the last albums they've put out. I don't think there are any 2 groups. Now, people will be like, oh, you leave a Wu-Tang out there. You were like, all right, first of all, let's
simmer down.
I love the Wu.
Let's unpack this.
Yeah, I love the Wu. 36, classic, no doubt.
That's it.
Forever is a very good album.
Not a classic.
And then we get into some of the other Wu albums like Iron Flag and other one. I mean, so it's like, you know,
kind of went down.
I think people start to take Wu and put them on a pedestal because of the individual work that they've done as artists. But when it comes to what they've done as a group, when you take Outkast catalog and a Tribe Called Quest catalog and stack them up against each other, now that's a debate we could probably have for a bonus podcast. Stacking up Outkast catalog versus Tribe's catalog and figuring out who wins the tail of the tape.
I think Outkast got it.
I think Outkast got that.
Outkast got it.
But do they though? Listen, because I think it's a little bit more of a conversation than you all think.
Well, I mean, I remember like the Love movie came out, people kind of like giving that mixed reviews. I didn't.
No, absolutely.
I think people be like a little bit hard on them than what they should have been.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like it wasn't up. I wouldn't put up there with like Midnight Marauders at all.
No.
Like,
Nah, I agree.
So if we talk about Tribe's first 3 albums, at least the first, well, we even say the first 4 albums, and you talk about the quality, especially the first 3, the debut album, because the title's too long for me to say right now.
Oh shit! I can't.
Lower End Theory.
Low End Theory.
And Midnight Marauders. I mean, you can't get a much better start to a catalog than that. So maybe we can do that. Maybe we can do a bonus catalog, and we can do that for the premium subscribers if we get them one day. And we can do a bonus one of putting in the tail of the tape. Outkast catalog versus the Tribe Called Quest catalog. And I'd love to be able to have that happen. I'd love to be able to have that debate. And we may just go ahead and throw that out there on social media for you guys to debate as well, because I'd love to be able to hear just this question about Outkast catalog as far as where this stands in terms of their catalog, Southernplayaistic, in regards to their other 3 major releases.
I just put that up.
Dave's on it, as always.
Yeah, got you.
So, gentlemen, this has been a pleasure. Outkast Southernplayaistic, their debut album. Go out and listen to it again. Stream it wherever you can listen to it again. It is a treasure to be treasured. So that is going to wrap up yet another edition of The Vault. Please make sure you check us out on our host, Podbean, on vaultcmr.podbean.com. You can also download, stream, and subscribe to The Vault CMR on Spotify and also Apple Podcasts. We appreciate all the support, and if you have a friend, make sure you tell a friend and tell that friend to tell a friend. As always, remember as always, remember to keep your headphones on and your music loud, but not too loud. And as we close, we like to remind everyone to dream big, because dreams are the basis for creation. Always create, motivate, and elevate, because you were never destined to stay or created to stay stationary in this life. And on that note, we stay peace.
peace.
Thank you for listening and coming into The Vault. Please subscribe and follow us on Facebook at IV Creative and Instagram at IVECRE8.